Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Daylong with Bhante Suddhāso. And today we will be studying again the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta. You can see the link at the top of the live chat. And we will be focusing in particular on mindfulness of mind. So, welcome to Marielle, Ela, Jens, Gita, Ryan, who was announcing that Suddhāso can count himself as having one more recruit. I want to move forward on the path to becoming a monastic. Not a light decision, but the right decision for me. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right. Well, welcome soon to the club. Hopefully, we'll see. And welcome to Sally, Lilia, Elaine, Bradley, James, Scott, Ethan, Joe, Mark, Nora, Edward, and Jerry. Great. And James says, so that makes Ryan, Bradley, and me at this point. Great. If my heart condition doesn't stop everything, then I'll be there. All right. Well, Bhante has a smile on his face, so I think that's a slight smile of approval. But I'll leave it to him. All right.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good morning, friends. So welcome back to the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta study. So today we'll be looking at the third section, mindfulness of the mind, Cittanupassana. So this is another fairly short section. So coming after mindfulness of feeling, which was what we did last time, which was a very short section. Now we have mindfulness of the mind, which is also a short section. So this might not take particularly long. We'll see how it goes. The sutta begins. Monks, how does a monk abide observing the mind as the mind? Monks, a monk understands a lustful mind as a lustful mind. He understands a lust-free mind as a lust-free mind. He understands a hate-filled mind as a hate-filled mind. He understands a hate-free mind as a hate-free mind. He understands a delusional mind as a delusional mind. He understands a delusion-free mind as a delusion-free mind. He understands a focused mind as a focused mind. He understands a scattered mind as a scattered mind. He understands an expanded mind as an expanded mind. He understands an unexpanded mind as an unexpanded mind. He understands a surpassable mind as a surpassable mind. He understands an unsurpassable mind as an unsurpassable mind. He understands a concentrated mind as a concentrated mind. He understands an unconcentrated mind as an unconcentrated mind. He understands a liberated mind as a liberated mind. He understands an unliberated mind as an unliberated mind. In this way, one abides observing the mind as the mind internally, or one abides observing the mind as the mind externally, or one abides observing the mind as the mind both internally and externally. Or one abides observing the nature of manifestation in relation to the mind, or one abides observing the nature of cessation in relation to the mind, or one abides observing the nature of both manifestation and cessation in relation to the mind. Or mindfulness that there is the mind is established to the extent necessary for knowledge and awareness. And one abides independent, and one does not cling to anything in the world. Monks, in this way, a monk abides observing the mind as the mind. So that's the whole section on mindfulness of mind. So it's quite brief. And if you look at this section, what the Buddha is emphasizing here is recognizing the characteristics and qualities of the mind in any given moment. So if there's lust in the mind, then to recognize that there is lust in the mind. If there's no lust in the mind, then to recognize that there's no lust in the mind. If there's aversion in the mind, then to recognize there's aversion in the mind. If there's no aversion, to recognize there's no aversion in the mind. And same with these other qualities. So if the mind is focused, then recognizing that it's focused. If it's scattered, then recognizing that it's scattered. If the mind feels expansive, if it feels very large and vast, then recognizing that the mind feels very vast. If the mind feels very contracted and small, then recognize that that's what it feels like. It feels very, very tiny, very limited. Then surpassable and unsurpassable. So the unsurpassable mind is the mind of an arhat, the fully awakened being. So the rest of us have surpassable minds. Then concentrated mind and unconcentrated mind. So that's the mind in samadhi. So recognizing when the mind is in samadhi, or recognizing when the mind has any degree of samadhi. So knowing how much samadhi the mind has in any given moment. And understanding a liberated mind and an unliberated mind. So liberated mind normally, again, refers to the fully awakened one, fully awakened mind. But I've also seen this explained as when the mind is temporarily liberated, such as when the mind is in jhana, it's temporarily liberated from defilement. But I suspect here that the Buddha does mean liberated in the sense of a fully liberated mind. And the Buddha applies the same evaluation. So observing the mind as the mind internally, externally, or both. And one way I've heard this explained in this context is that internally refers to intentional mental activities, intentional development of mind states or mind qualities. And externally refers to things which arise in the mind of their own accord. So things which are the product of past karma, which are the product of past causes and conditions. Then observing the nature of manifestation and cessation. So the appearing and vanishing of states of mind, the appearing and vanishing of qualities of mind. So applying that same recognition of impermanence, of the coming and going, the shifting and changing of the aspects of our mind, of the details and characteristics of our mind. So recognizing that all of these states are impermanent, they're changing. So if the mind is filled with aversion, well, recognize that aversion is coming into being and then ceasing. There's times when it's not there, and there's times when it is there, and there's times when it's changing, and there's times when it's completely gone. There's times when it feels one way, times when it feels another. So watching as it shifts and changes. Or mindfulness that there is the mind is established to the extent necessary for knowledge and awareness. So just in this case, just watching the mind. In a relaxed, peaceful way, just observing the mind without getting involved in anything that's going on in the mind. Just watching it the way that you would watch a movie, or the way that you would watch a show. You're not participating, you're just observing. So that's also a practice one can do, is just to observe the mind. And finally, one does not cling to anything in the world. So whatever appears in the mind, we recognize it as impermanent. We recognize it as something which comes and goes based on causes and conditions. And we don't hold on to it. We don't cling to it. We don't make it our home. We don't make it our self-identity. We let it come and go in its own way without getting involved. So this is the practice of mindfulness of mind. So it's to observe whatever characteristics or qualities the mind has moment by moment. And there's a few things that do need to be explained about this. First off is to note that this does form a bit of a contrast to what the Buddha says elsewhere in the suttas. For example, in the Sabbasava Sutta, the Buddha says that if one recognizes a lustful thought, then one should not tolerate it. One should make every effort to remove it, to eliminate it. If one recognizes an aversive thought, one should not tolerate it. One should make every effort to remove it. If one recognizes any kind of unwholesome thought or mind state, then one should make every effort to remove it. So that's indicating that one should make some effort to overcome the unwholesome states of mind that appear. And that's particularly important if we're dealing with any kind of intentional unwholesome mental activity. So here the Buddha is emphasizing knowing, understanding what's present in the mind. And understanding what's present in the mind is a very important step. So without understanding what the mind is currently disposed towards, what the current emotional state of the mind is, what the current characteristics and aspects of the mind are, without knowing that, then we can't know what's wholesome and what's unwholesome. We can't know what's intentional and what's unintentional. We can't know what we have a capacity to change and what we don't. So it always starts with knowing the mind as it is, knowing the mind on its own terms. Then we can recognize if we are engaging in any kind of unwholesome mental activity, then we stop. We remove it from the mind. We apply the instructions that are found in the Sabbasava Sutta, the Vitakkasaṇṭhāna Sutta, and countless other discourses to actively work to remove and overcome any unwholesome mind states that are currently present. So, what's slightly different is if one recognizes something present in the mind, which on examination, one is not producing it, one is not participating in it, one is not holding on to it, one is not perpetuating it in any way. But rather, it's something which appears in the mind because of past causes and conditions, lasts for however long those causes and conditions allow it to last, and then disappears on its own. So that's the case of what I like to call echoes in the mind. So things which we aren't actively doing, but which are remnants or echoes of past mental activity, echoes of things we've done with the mind in the past. And these have a distinctly different feeling than intentional mental activities, intentional emotional involvements, or intentional thoughts, or intentional mental programs. So these echoes, there's a quality of unrealness to them. There's a certain there's a feeling of distance to them, like they're a little bit far away, which is why I've again encountered them being referred to as external aspects of mind, and that it's not so personal to us, unless we take it personally, of course. And usually that's the mistake that we make, is that we just assume that whatever's in our mind is me. And we just assume that whatever's in our mind is something that we're doing. And that therefore whatever's in our mind is us, it's who we are. So you're just sitting here and just out of the blue, a thought of killing arises in your mind. It's easy to make the mistake of like, oh no, I'm a terrible person, I'm thinking about killing. But if you look more closely, you might recognize that actually that thought which appeared was not something that you produced. It was an echo drifting through the mind of some silly thought you had 10 years ago or 20 years ago or longer. Maybe it's just something which appeared from an old memory, or from something that you thought about a very long time ago. So when we pay closer attention, we can recognize, oh, this is not a volitional thought. This is not an intentional thought. This is not something that I'm actively producing. It's just something that's drifting through the mind, something that appears and vanishes in the mind. Again, it's like the difference between having a conversation with someone and hearing somebody else's conversation from a distance. So when you're conversing with someone, then you're very much fully involved, intentionally engaged in it. But if you just happen to overhear somebody else's conversation, well, you're not involved unless you get involved, unless you go up and start talking with them, or unless you start getting wrapped up in the back and forth, then you're involved. But if you just hear it as something which just happens to be going on in the background, but which has nothing to do with you, then there's no problem. So these are some ways that we can relate to what's going on in the mind. Just see it as something which doesn't have anything to do with us. And since it doesn't have anything to do with us, then we don't need to be involved in it. And we don't need to take it personally. We don't need to be influenced by it. And we don't need to go along with it. Just as when it's somebody else's thoughts, we don't need to get involved in them. When it's somebody else's ideas, we don't need to get involved. When it's somebody else's conversation, we don't need to participate. And again, recognizing that whatever states and characteristics of mind are currently present, all of them are impermanent. All of them are subject to change. And in fact, all of them are constantly changing. And all of them are insubstantial. When we look directly at them, we see that there's not really anything there. It's like a mirage, like an illusion, something hollow, empty of inherent essence. So this practice of observing the mind, this is where we mostly get into the observation of emotion. This would mostly fit under Cittanupassana. So I think this question came up last weekend with Vedananupassana, is asking how emotion fits in. So emotion mostly fits under mindfulness of the mind. So it's recognizing the emotional state of the mind. That would be one aspect of observing the mind as the mind, of observing the mind on its own terms. And it's recognizing what is the state of mind in this moment, but also recognizing I am not this state of mind. This state of mind is not who I am. This state of mind does not define me. So recognizing this is impermanent, this is insubstantial, this is conditional, this will arise and cease. Recognizing this is not me, this is not mine, this does not define me, this does not control me. Recognizing the objects and states and characteristics of mind as being impermanent and impersonal, anicca and anatta. And in this way, we can start to get some distance from it. We can start to disconnect from our usual tendency to identify as whatever appears in the mind, of thinking that whatever appears in the mind is who we are. So I don't really have too much else to say on this subject. I was trying to get Ayasoma to talk about it because this is actually much more something that she likes to talk about. I'm more interested in talking about samadhi based on body awareness. She likes to talk about mindfulness of the mind. So hopefully we'll extract a talk from Ayasoma on this subject sooner or later.
Monday evening.
Monday evening, there you go, 2 days. So think of this as the intro to Monday evening's talk. So at this time, if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and type them in the live chat, and I'll address them as best I can or try to get Soma to address them as best she can. She's shaking her head. That seems unlikely.
To retreat.
So please go ahead. If you have any questions, please go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much, Bhante, for sharing the Dhammam. And James is asking, does internally and externally refer to the sense basis and objects related to the 6 classes of consciousness?
I don't think so, no. Because the first 5 senses are mostly to do with the body. Technically everything is mind. Technically everything is mind objects. But if we talk in that way, then we're down from 4 Satipaṭṭhānas to 2, which isn't terribly helpful. So technically everything is mind. But no, I wouldn't take that as meaning the sense basis because, again, 5 of the 6 are referring to the body, bodily experiences. So, no, I think the Buddha, again, he is talking about the mind, the characteristics and qualities of mind. And to be honest, it's not totally clear to me how the internally-externally analysis applies here. This is one case where it feels a little bit like the repetition was repeated in a place where it doesn't necessarily apply in so straightforward of a way. So again, the best explanation that I've heard is, as I mentioned before, that internally refers to intentional mental activities and externally refers to unintentional things. So things which are arising of their own accord based on past causes and conditions. And also you'll notice that things, mental objects which we're not directly involved in, feel distant from us, like they're outside of us. Whereas things that we're intentionally participating in or engaged in feel very close to us. It feels very much like me. It feels very, very close to who we think of as me. So that's where I can see the internally, externally dyad making the most sense in this context. But to be honest, I've always been a little bit puzzled by the inclusion of that in this section.
Well, what came to mind for me, actually, I had the interpretation, like in the Mahamudra in Tibetan Buddhism. The question is the mind internal or external? So even though we have a sort of assumption that the mind is internal, then in reality our sphere of awareness is both internal and external. So you can think of yourself, what if the mind is external to you? So I thought this was a little bit the foundation to that sort of way of practicing meditation.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and Mark is saying, so today during my 1.5 hour sit, pain began at the very ending, 20 minutes or so. The mind went from observing the pain to back to samadhi. At one point, the mind automatically went to my abdomen, then to observing the pain, then to samadhi, and I felt energy from the abdomen help with the pain. This continued until the end. Is this okay, or is there a better way to deal with pain?
Well, if it works, it works. So I'm not quite sure what was going on with the abdomen thing. But generally speaking, the 2 ways that I recommend dealing with pain are to either directly observe the pain with full acceptance and curiosity, or to devote all of your attention to staying on your meditation object. And either one of these methods will remove the unpleasantness from the experience. I'm not exactly sure what was going on with the abdomen energy that you're referring to, but if it works, it works. Again, what we're interested in is results. If you're trying to develop samadhi, well, are you getting samadhi? If so, then it works and you can keep doing it. If you're trying to develop equanimity towards pain, well, if you're getting equanimity, then it works and you can keep doing it. So it's all about result. Are we getting the desired results? Then it's fine.
And Ryan is asking, is there a difference between the mind itself and things in the mind? And what should we be mindful of when doing this practice?
Is there a difference between the mind itself and objects in the mind? Well, it's a great thing for you to explore. Briefly speaking, I would say yes, but that's something that you should explore for yourself. If you look at the mind, there's something which feels a bit like a projector screen, like this blank canvas on which thoughts and emotions and activities in mind display and move. But that blank canvas is just what it's all appearing on. So you can start to get a sense of what I sometimes call the surface of the mind. But it's important to recognize that also is impermanent. That also is insubstantial. That also is impersonal. But yeah, you can make a clear distinction between the mind and objects of mind. So in this case, what the Buddha is encouraging is to observe the states of mind that are present, the characteristics of the mind that are present. So if the mind feels greedy or aversive, then recognize that. If the mind feels vast or tiny, recognize that. If the mind feels focused or scattered, recognize that. If it feels concentrated or unconcentrated, recognize that. So it's acknowledging the states and characteristics of mind, being clearly aware of the states and characteristics of the mind, moment by moment. Okay.
And Jens is asking, Bhante, I find it easy to drop states of mind that are clearly echoes, but what do you recommend for states of mind that I identify with or that are very strong or have a strong sense of self? Like hunger?
Well, all the more reason to let go of them, all the more reason to drop them. So just look clearly at it as being impermanent, as being conditionally arisen, and as being impersonal. You can tell yourself, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not who I am. This does not define me, this does not control me. So recognizing the impermanent and impersonal nature of whatever is appearing in the mind. And bring your mind back to peacefulness. Recognize that whatever is present in the mind, whatever is arising in the mind, it's just dukkha arising. Which means we can allow it to cease because it's just dukkha ceasing. Nobody ever lamented because dukkha ceased. Okay.
And Elaine says, I keep getting stuck on the non-self, or rather, what is recognizing an echo and the lack of need to follow it?
A better question would be, why do you think there needs to be a who that is recognizing things? Next question.
And Bradley says, does observing manifestation and cessation refer to watching mind states arise and cease, their impermanence?
Yes, correct.
All right. Well, that was the last question for now, unless another one appears.
Well, in that case, we might have a short sutta session this morning, which is fine. If that's the case, then please do some meditation practice. Work on observing your mind, observing the mind on its own terms, watching the states and characteristics, trying to get intimately familiar with the feeling of the mind, moment by moment. You don't necessarily need to put words and labels on the experience, but just really trying to feel the mind. the fabric of the mind, moment by moment. And recognizing that, once again, it's impermanent and it's impersonal. It is the way it is because of past causes and conditions. So as long as we don't start intentionally doing anything, then what we're watching is simply the unfolding of the consequences of those past causes and conditions, which makes it very clear that it's not me and not mine. It's just the mind unfolding in its own way. So if there's nothing else, we can go ahead and close for the morning.
Mark says, so the abdomen thing is from my Qigong practices, I suspect. I have been reading Vimuttidhamma by a Thai forest monk in Burma. He makes quite a bit about chakras in this practice. Thoughts?
Be very careful. So I knew one young man who started intermingling Hindu chakra practices with Theravada Buddhist practice and wound up driving himself temporarily insane. So I don't particularly recommend getting too inventive with things of that sort, unless you're working directly with a teacher who knows what they're doing. Then it might be okay. But when you're working with things which are not spoken about in the Buddhist scriptures, then you have to be extremely careful. Focusing attention on the abdomen is fine, as long as it's just an area where you're focusing attention on. That's not a problem. Getting involved in manipulating energy currents and movements in the body or energy centers or chakras, again, that's not quite what we're doing in Buddhism. We're not really interested in manipulating energy currents or energy centers. In Tibetan Buddhism, there are those sorts of practices, but they're done under the careful guidance of an experienced teacher. They're practices which are not to be done without supervision because they can very easily cause damage, both physical and psychological damage. So I really don't recommend getting involved in playing around with the energy body. That way you can cause a lot of harm to yourself. So it's not recommended. So again, you can focus on your abdomen just as a part of the body that's nice to focus on. Many people find it a very effective samadhi object. But yeah, don't get involved in trying to manipulate the energy body when you're doing Buddhist meditation. It's not going to do you any good, and it might cause harm.
Sally is asking, may I ask if we see the echo has unwholesome ingredients, we don't need to change it? Because I thought it reflects a kind of unwholesome habitual tendency.
Well, that's a decision that you can make. So if you're just practicing observing the mind, then you're just observing the mind. As long as you're not participating in the echo, then it doesn't define you and it doesn't control you. Kind of like if I have a memory of when I stole something when I was 10 years old, that doesn't mean that I am a thief. It just means I'm having a memory of a time, a long time ago, when I stole something. I actually don't remember if I stole something at the age of 10. That's just an example that comes to mind. So similarly, if there's some echo in the mind, which is of an unwholesome mind state or attitude that you had in the past, well, that doesn't mean that's what you have right now. If you were aversive at some point in the past and an echo of that appears in the mind, that doesn't mean you're aversive right now. If you were greedy at some point in the past and now an echo appears in the mind, that doesn't mean you're greedy right now. So look at it and see, is it intentional or unintentional? Am I participating or not participating? Is there some volitional element to this? Am I involved in it? And if the answer is no, then you can just watch as it arises and ceases, and there's no problem. Because you'll see it as something external to you, something outside of you. Then there's nothing to worry about. But if you notice any movement towards that object, any interest in it, any involvement in it, any participation in it, any tendency at all to go along with it, then that's something that you need to work on restraining and controlling immediately. And then you might actually want to work on removing that thought from the mind, because it's clearly something which is no longer purely external, but something that you're engaging with, something that you're getting involved in. And that indicates that you still have an underlying tendency towards that kind of unwholesome mental behavior. So that is something which needs to be addressed immediately.
She says it's interesting that our mind easily follows the echoes, then the echoes become producing volitional thoughts without catching it.
Yeah, this is why we need to notice it immediately. Because if we don't notice it immediately, then we'll have a tendency to get involved. And that causes all kinds of messes.
And Yen says, I thought for a second you were confessing to a crime, stealing.
No, I'm not going into the past confessions of my pre-monk life. Not today, anyway.
We can have a special session.
But we won't.
But let's not. Bradley says, in terms of the arising of mind states that are just unfolding or more external, this is more a practice of observation, right? Not getting attached to it if it's pleasant, and also not being aversive to it, unpleasant?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, again, it's the same as like sounds in the background. You can't necessarily control them. So instead, we work on equanimity towards them. We work on not being bothered by them. Okay? And not being attached to them either.
Oh, cute. Oh, you can see his something. Oh, his back, little patch of fur, and his little tail. All right. Well, I think that's all the questions for this morning. Well, there's a comment from Sally. It says, I did see a strong self-identity related to past unwholesome mind. Mm. And there's also a comment from James that says, Stan!
Yeah, so past unwholesome mind, recognize that's not who you are. It's just a memory. It's not you. So you don't need to be worried about it. So I can think of a lot of things that I did and thought and said in the past, but that's not who I am now. It doesn't define me. It's just memories. It's just stories. Okay?
And Demetrius is asking, could Vipassana meditation lead to the first jhana?
No.
All right. And on that note, you can practice with Bhante's suggestions. And Bradley, in fact, is asking, can you say a bit about today's schedule? So maybe you can say a bit about today's schedule.
Yeah, so do some meditation practice, sitting meditation, walking meditation, sitting meditation until 11 o'clock. Then at 11, you can stop and do a little bit of work. So maybe a little bit of light house cleaning, sweep your floor, clean your bathroom, and make a quick lunch for yourself. Have a nice quiet lunch at around 12 o'clock. Then you can take a little break and start again in the afternoon at 2:30. So at 2:30, we'll be having another live stream, which will be some meditation practice together. And then continue to meditate until 5 o'clock. Then have another little break. Can resume at 6. We'll have the last live stream of the day at 7:30. Okay.
All right. So if you have any questions also about your meditation practice, you can bring them up at 2:30 p.m. when we will be live streaming again, and we can discuss everything at that time. And Sally says, we'll practice cutting the thoughts when it's an echo stage today.
Great. Okay.
That sounds fun. All right. So have a great, and we'll see you later.
And goodbye from Stanley. Bye.
Bye. Meow.